A hotel owner is mocking an elderly janitor, saying cruel things to her. But she doesn't know Barron Trump is listening nearby, and what he does next will surprise everyone. It all started in the luxurious Orchid Regency Hotel, a place known for its marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and elegant decor. Every detail, from the polished brass fixtures to the soft music playing in the background, reflects its grandeur and exclusivity. Guests arrive dressed in their finest, while the staff works tirelessly behind the scenes to maintain the hotel's pristine reputation. Among the workers is Ellie Jackson, an elderly black janitor with years of dedication to her job. Ellie is a quiet yet strong woman, her graying hair and tired eyes speaking of the countless long days she's spent ensuring the hotel remains spotless. Pushing her cleaning cart down the grand hallways, Ellie takes pride in her work, even though her efforts often go unnoticed. For years, she has silently endured the hardships of her job, her dignity unshaken despite the lack of acknowledgement. On the other hand, the hotel's owner, Mrs. Rebecca Hensley, is a woman of wealth and power. Known for her sharp suits and even sharper tongue, she commands attention wherever she goes. However, her reputation among the staff is far from flattering. Mrs. Hensley is dismissive and arrogant, treating the employees as if they are beneath her. She has a particular disdain for those she considers lesser, often belittling them with harsh words or cutting remarks. For Ellie, working under someone like Mrs. Hensley is a daily test of patience and resilience. Despite the owner's condescending attitude, Ellie continues her work with quiet determination. Little does she know, today will be different. What begins as just another day at the hotel will soon take an unexpected turn, shaking the very foundation of its polished image. Ellie Jackson had just begun cleaning the men's restroom, her cleaning cart parked neatly by the door. The sound of the mop swishing across the marble floor was the only noise in the otherwise quiet space. Ellie moved with the care and precision of someone who had done this job for years, her movements deliberate yet slow, her aging body feeling the strain of decades of hard work. Suddenly, the restroom door swung open, and in walked Mrs. Rebecca Hensley, the hotel's owner. Dressed in her tailored suit and high heels, she exuded confidence and authority. Her sharp eyes scanned the restroom before landing on Ellie. Instantly, her expression shifted to one of disdain. "What is this, Mrs. Hensley snapped, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Why is this restroom not spotless? You've been in here forever, and it still looks like this." Ellie looked up, startled. "Mom, I just started cleaning." But Mrs. Hensley didn't let her finish. She waved a dismissive hand, her voice growing louder. "Excuses. Always excuses. You've been here for years, and you still can't keep up. Honestly, I don't even know why we keep you on staff." Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the mop. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had only just arrived, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of Mrs. Hensley's insults pressed heavily on her chest. "You're too slow, too old," Mrs. Hensley continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "And don't even get me started on your attitude. People like you should feel lucky to even work here." Ellie lowered her gaze, her heart aching from the humiliation. She had endured countless insults over the years, but this felt different, harsher, crueler. And yet, she stayed silent. Inside one of the restroom stalls sat Barron Trump, a young guest staying at the hotel. At just 20 years old, Barron was known for his quiet and composed nature, preferring to observe the world around him rather than rush to judgment. He had come to the luxurious Orchid Regency Hotel for a brief stay, expecting peace and quiet. But what he overheard that morning left him stunned. As he sat silently in the stall, the restroom door opened, and the sharp voice of Mrs. Rebecca Hensley, the hotel owner, filled the room. "What is this mess? Why isn't this restroom spotless?" she demanded angrily. From her tone, it was clear she wasn't speaking to a guest but to a staff member. Barron listened as an older woman, her voice soft and steady, tried to explain. "I just started cleaning, Mom. I'll have it done soon." But Mrs. Hensley didn't let her finish. Her tone grew louder, more cutting. "Excuses. Always excuses. You're too slow, too old. Honestly, people like you should feel grateful to even work here." Barron froze, his heart sinking as the harsh words echoed through the restroom. He could hear the pain in the elderly woman's voice, as she tried to stay calm and respectful, despite the insults being hurled at her. The owner's cruel remarks became sharper, turning personal. "Do you know how lucky you are to work in a place like this? You're nothing but a burden to this hotel." Anger began to rise in Barron's chest. He clenched his fists, unable to believe what he was hearing. How could someone treat another person, someone so vulnerable, with such disrespect? The woman didn't deserve this. No one did. He remained silent, knowing it wasn't the right moment to step out. But his disbelief grew with every word the owner spoke, her entitled and cruel attitude on full display. Barron's sharp mind began piecing together a response. This wasn't just about standing up for the janitor. It was about confronting behavior that shouldn't exist anywhere, especially in a place that claimed to value luxury and dignity. Barron took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't stay silent much longer. The restroom was silent for a moment after Mrs. Hensley's latest cruel remark, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Ellie Jackson, the elderly janitor, stood with her eyes downcast, gripping the mop tightly to steady her trembling hands. Mrs. Hensley, oblivious to the weight of her words, was about to continue her tirade when the stall door creaked open. Barron Trump stepped out calmly, his tall frame and composed demeanor instantly commanding attention. Mrs. Hensley froze mid-sentence, her face a mix of confusion and surprise. She wasn't expecting anyone else to be there, especially not someone like him. "Excuse me," Barron said, his voice calm but firm, "but I couldn't help overhearing everything you just said." Mrs. Hensley blinked, quickly regaining her usual arrogance. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone shifting to one of forced politeness. "I didn't realize you were here." "I'm sure you didn't," Barron interrupted, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "If you had, perhaps you'd have thought twice before speaking the way you did." Ellie's eyes widened as she looked up, surprised by his sudden appearance and even more so by his words. Barron turned slightly toward her, giving her a small, reassuring nod, before focusing back on Mrs. Hensley. "This is how you treat someone who's dedicated years of her life to making your hotel what it is?" Barron asked, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. "You mock her age, her speed, her very presence, as if she's beneath you. Yet I'm sure your hotel proudly claims to value its employees, doesn't it?" Mrs. Hensley's face turned pale. "I was just addressing a performance issue," she stammered. "You have to understand." "What I understand," Barron cut her off, his tone sharper now, "is that luxury isn't just about marble floors and fancy chandeliers. It's about treating the people who make this place run with dignity and respect. And you failed miserably at that." Mrs. Hensley's arrogance crumbled into visible shock as Barron delivered his words with unwavering confidence. Her eyes darted nervously, realizing the weight of the situation. "And just so we're clear," Barron added, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not just a guest here. I'm Barron Trump, and I won't let this kind of behavior slide." Ellie stood in awe, her heart swelling with gratitude as she watched the young man confront the woman who had humiliated her. The air in the restroom was thick with tension as Barron Trump stood his ground, his piercing gaze locked on Mrs. Hensley. The hotel owner, who moments ago had been brimming with arrogance, now seemed visibly shaken. Ellie Jackson, still clutching her mop, watched the scene unfold with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. "Mrs. Hensley," Barron began, his voice steady and deliberate, "your behavior today is not only disgraceful but also deeply hypocritical. You claim to run a luxury hotel, yet you treat the very people who make it possible as if they're disposable." The owner tried to regain her composure, forcing a tight smile. "Mr. Trump, I assure you, this is just a misunderstanding. I was merely addressing some concerns with—" "A misunderstanding," Barron interrupted, his voice growing sharper. "No, Mrs. Hensley. What I witnessed was blatant disrespect and cruelty towards someone who has dedicated years to this hotel. Do you think treating people like this goes unnoticed? Do you think this kind of behavior won't have consequences?" Mrs. Hensley's face paled further. "I didn't mean any harm," she stammered, her tone faltering. "It was just a moment of frustration." Barron didn't let her finish. "Save your excuses," he said firmly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Ellie properly and ensure she is given the respect and recognition she deserves. And if you don't, I'll make sure this incident is brought to the attention of the press and your investors. Let's see how they feel about your so-called commitment to excellence when they hear about this." Mrs. Hensley's hands trembled slightly as she realized the weight of Barron's words. She looked toward Ellie, her expression a mixture of discomfort and forced sincerity. I'm sorry, Ellie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I appreciate all the hard work you do for this hotel." Ellie said nothing, her gaze steady as she searched for any hint of genuine remorse. "She didn't find it." Barron nodded, his stance unwavering. "That's a start. But actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Hensley. Make sure this apology isn't just for show." Mrs. Hensley nodded stiffly, her pride clearly wounded. Ellie, meanwhile, stood a little taller, knowing that, for once, her voice had been heard, even if it came through someone else. The tension in the restroom lingered as Mrs. Hensley reluctantly apologized, her words stiff and forced. "Ellie," she said, her voice low and hesitant, "I apologize for my behavior earlier. I appreciate the years you've worked here." Ellie stood still, unsure how to respond. The apology didn't feel genuine, but it was something she never expected to hear. For a moment, she considered letting her anger spill out, but instead, she simply nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady. Barron Trump observed the exchange, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Mrs. Hensley," he said firmly, "an apology is only meaningful if it's followed by change. Treating your staff with respect isn't just a courtesy, it's a necessity. People like Ellie are the backbone of this hotel. Without them, your chandeliers wouldn't shine, your floors wouldn't sparkle, and your guests wouldn't feel the luxury they pay for." Mrs. Hensley shifted uncomfortably, her usual confidence now replaced by embarrassment. "I understand, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This won't happen again." Barron's gaze remained steady. "See that it doesn't. And remember, dignity isn't reserved for the wealthy or the powerful. It's something every person deserves, regardless of their position." With that, Barron turned to Ellie. "Thank you for all the work you've done here, Ellie. It doesn't go unnoticed, not by everyone." His words were sincere, and for the first time in a long while, Ellie felt truly seen and valued. As Barron left the restroom, he glanced back at Mrs. Hensley one last time. "Think carefully about how you treat people, Mrs. Hensley. It says more about you than it does about them." The restroom door swung shut behind him, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Mrs. Hensley stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure of what to say or do next. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. She knew this incident would not be easily forgotten, especially if word got out. Ellie, however, felt a glimmer of hope. While the apology might not have been heartfelt, the events of the day had validated her years of hard work. For the first time, she felt she wasn't just another invisible worker in the background, she mattered. As the story of Ellie Jackson and Barron Trump unfolds, it leaves us with a powerful reminder about the true value of dignity and respect. In a world often driven by status and power, it's easy to overlook the hard work and dedication of those who make our lives better every day. But it's in those small moments, how we treat the people who serve us, that our true character is revealed. Dignity and respect should not be reserved for a chosen few. They are basic rights that everyone deserves, regardless of their job title, background, or age. Ellie, with her years of dedication, is no less important than the guests who enjoy the luxury she works so hard to maintain. And Barron's actions remind us that even in the face of power and arrogance, standing up for what's right can make all the difference. This isn't just about a single incident in a hotel restroom, it's about how we, as individuals, choose to act in our everyday lives. Do we acknowledge the people who help us, or do we take them for granted? Do we stand up for others when we witness injustice, or do we stay silent? How we treat others defines us more than titles or wealth ever could. Kind word, a moment of gratitude, or standing up against wrong can ripple far beyond what we imagine. As you go about your day, reflect on how your actions and words impact those around you. Let this story inspire you to be kinder, fairer, and more mindful. Together, we can create a world where dignity isn't just a word, but a practice we all uphold. And remember, kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable.